I sincerely hope you don't skip the entire lesson that we have covered. The fundamentals are crucial. If you miss anything that can increase your expertise, you won't be a successful technician. We will work on the basics in the upcoming lesson. So let's move on to a new lesson about classification of sensor. There are two classifications of sensors: active sensor and passive sensors. What is remote sensing? Remote sensing can be divided into two primary categories: active and passive, based on the signal source that is used to examine the item, while passive remote sensing devices rely on reflected light. Active ones need their own source of emission of light to function. The type of sensors is defined by how they work to monitor a specific area as well. A sensor indeed is either active or passive. An active sensor is a sensing device that requires an external source of power to operate. Active sensing devices gather information related to the environment and translate this into a digital signal to be transmitted to the control. The controller will then convert the value coming from the sensing device into a temperature reading. The passive sensors or probes in air handling systems are devices providing resistance values to the controller whose they are wired with. The resistance value is then converted by the control. These are Siemens temperature sensor. One of them is active sensor and the other is passive. There are ways to determine if sensor is active or passive. Let's check the two sensors to assess the differences. As you can see, the detecting probes of each have differences, but we cannot distinguish between an active and a passive sensor using the probe alone. Let us open and see what's inside the sensor. Checking the sensor's datasheet is the correct method and easiest way for determining whether it is active or passive. We are basically doing this to compare the two. Okay, this one is Siemens QAM 2140 model. And the other one is QFM 2160 model. So QFM cover have a circuit board, while QAM model doesn't have. The sensing element of QAM is connected to a 2-port terminal block, and the QFM sensing element have 3-port terminal block and another 4-port terminal block on the bottom left side, marked as U1, U2, G0, and G. Which one do you believe to be the active and passive sensor then? Now let us see their datasheet to determine the sensor classification. This is QAM 2140 datasheet. As we scroll down, we can see already that this sensor is a passive sensor. The sensing element of QAM2140 is T1 PTC. PTC stands for Positive Temperature Coefficient. As the name suggests, Positive Temperature Coefficient thermistors, or PTC for short, have resistance that will increase as their temperature goes up. So we already distinguish which one is passive sensor. Now let's check QFM2160. As you can see on the table, QFM2160 is an active sensor. If you look at the connecting terminals G and G0, this terminal is for the 24 volts AC operating voltage. Therefore, we must connect the external power source to this terminal. So QAM2140 is a passive sensor and QFM2160 is an active sensor.